The Hot Seat.
Welcome to the Hot Seat, a debate segment where ideas clash and insights spark. I'm your host, Hongbin Jeong. It's a scene that unsettles many of us. A child is wandering alone in a busy MRT station, or a man collapses suddenly on the street. Dozens of people see what's happening, but no one moves a muscle to help. Cameras are lifted, eyes dart away, and the crowd waits for someone else to take the first step. Psychologists call this the bystander effect. It's the idea that the more people are around, the less likely any one person is to help. It came into the spotlight once again after the tragic case of 11-year-old Muhammad Haril Effendi, who was seen by several passerbys before he was later found drowned at East Coast Park. Some were quick to blame apathy. Others say it's not indifference at all, but hesitation. People unsure of what's really happening or afraid of doing the wrong thing. So here's the debate. Does the bystander effect reveal a lack of empathy? Or is it simply a quirk of human psychology that makes us freeze even when we do care? Well, before we hear from our guests and dive deeper into this debate, here's a disclaimer. The views and arguments presented by our interviewees do not necessarily reflect their personal beliefs or opinions. Instead, they are here to provide a fresh perspective on the topic at hand. On that note, if you'd like to send some questions in for our guests, feel free to WhatsApp us at 88550893 or leave a comment on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, as we're currently streaming live on those platforms as well. Now, without further ado, joining us today is Dr. Annabelle Chow, who is a principal clinical psychologist at Annabelle Psychology, representing that the bystander effect is not a lack of empathy. We also have Dr. Razwana Begum, who is the head of public safety and security program at the Singapore University of Social Sciences, who will try to convince us otherwise. Welcome to the show, both. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
All right, just to start off here, I mean, we often hear about cases like Haril's, the child that went missing, where bystanders hesitate or do nothing. Just to pull in another case that highlights this is on September 30th, the viral video showed a 21-year-old kicking a 61-year-old housekeeper at SMU. Now, the clip showed multiple people witnessing the action without stepping in. So I want to ask the both of you here, what is really happening in the minds of people in these moments? Well, Dr. Razwana, do you want to go first?
Yes, I think from my perspective, I would think that people are just, wondering what to do. They are just frozen. They're not heartless in that context. They're just unsure. So the brain is kind of processing the whole incident and they're wondering, should I step in or should I wait? Or is there someone else is going to come in, to support the individual? And considering that they are young people, they might be thinking, okay, what if I get into trouble, for instance? From my experiences working with many young people in the past, I've noticed that a lot of the times it's not that they don't care, but it's because they don't know what to do. And in that moment, they just freeze and they just don't react.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dr. Annabelle, what is your perspective here?
Well, I wouldn't say the bystander effect reflects a lack of empathy for sure. I think about human behaviors and decisions to be more complex than we actually see. So a lot of times the way that we make decisions is a result of how we think about things. And how we think about things is also a result of our current and early life experiences. And all of that can complicate that moment where a crisis has happened and it's unexpected and we need to know how to react immediately. So I often think that not to be indifference. So I see that to be hesitation, and actually quite important kind of hesitation where you have to assess and observe the situation carefully first before you react. But I think psychologically, and there are actually studies to support that as well, that there's generally a diffusion of responsibility when more people are around, because we kind of assume that somebody else will step in. And also that if nobody else steps in, then maybe it's not as serious or not really our place to act. So if you think about culturally in the Singapore context, we kind of grew up with this idea of mind your own business. So it's a bit of that cultural spin to that. So it's not really our place to act. but this doesn't actually reflect their state of mind or how they think and feel about it.
Okay. Well, but in other cases, like, say, the Beach Road incident, where a man was seen swinging a chopper and attacking a woman, multiple people stepped in to help. And that makes us question whether the bystander effect is really a myth after all. So, could the bystander effect be a myth? I mean, is it a term coined by social media to put the blame on others for not helping, or is it very much real? Dr. Razwana?
I would think that it is very much the context that matters, right? So we are looking at when danger is very clear, it's very apparent, and I think that's when one person would come in and someone would act, and then it becomes more of a contagious effect. People will come in to stop the incident from taking place, or prevent the harm from escalating. So I would think that it's not about whether it's a myth or not. It's really the context about when someone has the courage to come in and provide that support and provide that intervention. And a lot of it also got to do with that individual's ability to do so as well. You don't want to come in and make things worse, right? And when you know there is apparent danger, you would stop someone. Like, you would actually prevent someone from crossing the road when you see the car. It's a reflex action, you see. So I think that's slightly different. I wouldn't say that the bystander effect is real. It's real, but it's also depending on the context itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Annabelle, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's actually it's not coined by social media. It's actually a phenomenon. And in fact, this theory was proposed by psychologists as early as 1964. And I'll share with you a specific case study that all psychologists have had to study. It's about the case of Kitty Genovese in 1964. So she was this New York lady who was tragically stabbed to death near her home in Queens. And what had happened was she had actually parked her car about 30 meters from her residence, and while walking home, she was viciously attacked. What was actually more scary was that she was screaming for help, and neighbors were actually peering out of their windows. They heard her, but nobody came down to help her. And the perpetrator actually left and came back and continued to stab her and eventually murdered her. So it was found that at that point, 38 people actually observed the incident from their homes. They heard the screams, but nobody believed that they needed to do something. And so the phenomenon was then later coined to be the bystander effect and what we call diffusion of responsibility. So this is very much later replicated in several studies as well.
Right. I do remember learning about that case as well when I was studying psychology. Well, I mean, in this case then, Dr. Razwana, you talked about, the reflex, right? Especially when it is a dangerous situation. So when do people feel compelled then to step in during an emergencies? And when do they remain passive bystanders? I mean, does it depend on the situation, or does it all boil down to the person you are and the person you are individually? Are you a person who is willing to help, then you'll step in?
It would be a combination. If you look at the danger being apparent and is very real, and you have the capacity and the ability, sometimes it could be a reflex situation. So, for instance, if you see someone about to fall off the escalator, this has happened even in my own situation where my son, he was only 10. He went to, stop that person, even though he knows that he may not be able to actually carry that person. But he went quickly and he stopped. The other situation, interestingly, we see this a lot in Singapore. We have all these migrant workers who come in and help in a situation where there's fire, in a situation where there is traffic accidents.
A sinkhole, right?
Yeah, and they come in almost immediately. It's also got to do with their to some extent, if you were to study this, even though we have not really looked at it in detail, but they usually come from an environment where they work in very closely with others. They are from a very close-knit community, and they are doing the actual work. They are in that area, and they have the ability and the strength to be able to do this. In my current, what I teach at the university, I teach public safety and security. And a lot of my students tend to be from the home team, for instance. And they have the ability, they are firefighters and they work in the prison setting and they are police officers. So in this kind of situation, they know exactly what to do. There was a situation where we actually got lost in Dubai Mall. And we didn't know how to get back. Such a huge mall. We didn't know how to get back to our bus so that we can go back to the university. And I had someone from MINDEF who knows how to read maps, who was able to come in. I mean, it's not a life-threatening situation, but they can use their skills almost automatically, right? So I think it's a matter of like if you have a doctor, on board, even in a plane situation, they will come in and help. So I would think it's more of both, whether they actually think that this danger is real and they can contribute and they can stop or prevent or help. The other bit is also about where they're coming from in the context of, their background and all. Interestingly, in criminology, we also have a theory that we study. We look at it we call it the broken window theory.
Okay.
This is a bit like when you have a neighborhood where everything is so negative, there's no lights, there's going to be, when you step out there to stop a thief from stealing something, you are going to get hurt. That would actually stop a person from wanting to help as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right. Well, Dr. Annabelle, what are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree with her because it's, fear of not being equipped can act as a barrier to helping, right? And I really like the example of like firefighters and all that because they are equipped to respond in an emergency situation, when there's a fire. I think it might be the barrier of entry might be higher if someone who is untrained to run into a fire and know how to handle that situation, regardless of how empathetic they might be, it might be difficult. And in fact, sometimes we might actually hinder the process a bit more. So it's not so much just about their confidence level or like their willingness to help or how they feel, like how empathetic they are. But I think it's also about having that confidence of their ability, that they need to have their ability to be able to manage that situation.
Well, when so many people react the same way, choosing to stand back, it kind of starts to feel like more than just individual hesitation. It feels like a pattern. So, Dr. Annabelle, isn't repeated inaction a societal empathy deficit? How can we argue that people have empathy when the bystander effect seems to appear again and again?
So empathy doesn't necessarily always translate into action. So it's more complex than that. And repeated inaction also doesn't mean that society has lost empathy. So I think often there's a gap between our morals, our values, and our collective behavior. And also on that note, it also depends on collectively what our culture believes in. So I think in our culture, particularly, we grew up in an environment that subtly or maybe explicitly reinforces messages like mind your own business, don't be a kepo, do your own thing, don't get involved. And these are like behavioral responses that we are socialized to respond in, and passivity can feel safer and more acceptable because that's what we are socialized into. But having said that, I think it's quite important to perpetuate a culture where helping feels normal and feels safe. But of course, I think it's important for us to also assess our abilities and how safe it is before we take a step forward to provide assistance.
Well, then, Dr. Razwana, if hesitation is built into human psychology, why do some people act immediately while others freeze? I mean, isn't it proof that people do empathize but lack the courage to act?
I would think that a lot of them, as I mentioned earlier, may not act immediately because they don't have that training. So if you look at people like teachers, police officers, or even the first aiders and all that, they would know what to do and they don't hesitate, they don't freeze. But those who hesitate, and because their fear is taking over them, and they feel that it's actually a natural stress response in terms of, when you fear, when you see something that's a bit more, out of context, the first thing that you do is you freeze, right? It's a normal body reaction, to try to protect yourself. But I would think that doesn't necessarily mean that you would not eventually, be able to do so. So I feel like empathy can also be developed in that context, right? By giving them the skills and the opportunities to be able to do things, and to react in a certain way. I think the key is to prepare people, even in the smallest things that they can come forward to help and to do. And that's one of the things that we teach at the university, like crisis management. What can you do, even if it's just managing the social media, not making people panic. That is also a way to kind of not make things worse, right, in a crisis situation. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one study shows that people are 19 times more likely to help when danger is obvious, but when events are ambiguous, hesitation dominates even among those who care. So, Dr. Annabelle, I mean, some people hold back because they're afraid of being judged or making a mistake, but if that fear stops you from helping, can you really call yourself empathetic, or are you just putting yourself first? I mean, if self-protection overrides compassion, is that still genuine empathy?
I think the idea that if the fear, whether it's the fear of the actual act or being judged, stops me from helping and I'm not empathetic, I think that's too simplistic, because empathy isn't all or nothing. It's influenced by multiple conscious and automatic psychological processes. It's also influenced by our early life experiences, our past experiences, our present circumstances, and also just like how Dr. Razwana has mentioned about whether we feel equipped to be helpful and what we are up against. So it's like a complex multifactorial process that is not as straightforward as classroom moral lessons in that sense. In real life scenarios, things are fast paced, it's messy and it's risky. And that's why I think public education and psychological readiness is so important. So I think even if we talk about empathy, there are different types of empathy, right? We've got the emotional empathy where we can feel another person's distress. We put ourselves in their shoes and we can actually feel what they feel. But we also have the cognitive empathy where we just understand it from a very logical and cognitive perspective. So for to translate into action, it actually requires us to have pro-social behaviors like the helping action, right? It needs to be safe, it needs to be purposeful. But when we get too stressed or the uncertainty is very high, or we feel like there's fear, then that will decrease that pro-social behavior, and then we might end up freezing or withdrawing.
I mean, some argue that empathy should, overcome fear. So, Dr. Razwana, but if hesitation is hardwired as a stress response, why are we even judging people's morals for inaction?
That's a very, very good perspective to take, right? Of why are we judging people? So I think we should not ask why people don't act. We should ask how can we help them to act, right? How can we prepare them to be able to come forward and provide some sort of support? So I think honestly, hesitation is just, like I said, part of being human. And we all assess what is safe and what is not safe from our own background. And so instead of judging, what we should be doing is to help them learn how to act safely and what can they do to help others, like call for help, reach out, maybe even record, even observe the situation, what's happening, so that they can quickly do something. If there's going to be another fire somewhere, they can at least come forward and stop that, right? Or point out to the area where danger could be still there. In that context, then I think when I used to, in my previous work, I was working mainly with people who have been in contact with the law. In that context, then I've learned that judging people don't change them. What really matters is understanding why they behaved in that way. Why did they break the law, right? So I think what we need to do is to step back and see, okay, it doesn't mean that they got no empathy just because they're not acting, but it's really why are they not doing it, and what exactly can we do to provide that kind of environment, to provide that kind of support. I think Dr. Annabelle has highlighted the society that we are in. It is a society where we have very high trust, and we tend to look at it as somebody's going to come and help. Everything is done very quickly. Our ambulance is like the fastest, we're the safest country in the world, and all that. So I think all of those things create this kind of inability for us to move quickly, right? Yeah, so that could also be another reason in terms of how can we as individual contribute, and we can empathize in many different ways, right? But also being mindful, taking that pause and not making things worse is also critical. It's also important. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, speaking of, teaching others, Dr. Annabelle, we teach children to help others, yet adults often fail to intervene. Is moral education and real world action difficult to separate?
Yes, I actually think they're quite difficult to align because, I teach my children the same thing, right? We present moral lessons in very clear black and white terms. If your friend is in trouble, help them. If you see them get bullied, tell the teacher. We give them very clear instructions, but real world is marked with a lot of nuances. It's not always so clear. And in fact, in adulthood, a lot of situations are very fast moving, very ambiguous, very risky. And we actually want to teach our children now to weigh consequences, weigh your own personal safety, kind of observe. And all these things need to be done in very quick seconds, right? So even if your moral compass is intact, your behavioral response may not follow instantly or may not follow even at all. And also, there's also a social layer to that. So if you think about in children, if they help someone, they're being praised. It's part of being kind. But as adults, especially in our culture, if you help someone, then you may be told, why you so kaypoh, you shouldn't get involved. And that social messaging actually discourages intervention and teaches us not to be involved. So that is also a complete opposite to what we grow up learning as kids. So I think moral education does give us the values, but real world education or action actually requires the situational judgment to collect data, and then you need to reassess the situation. And these actually operate on two different systems. One is moral, one is psychological. And what Dr. Razwana said is to bridge that gap, right? Is to actually normalize safety intervention, to teach them concrete ways to help. And helping may not be in that moment. It can be also after that. How do you help? And also to revive the kampong spirit where we can actually, adopt that kampong spirit to help each other out and look out for each other.
Well, speaking of being capo here, bystanders get a lot of flack on social media when, comments argue that people would rather take out their phones and record whatever is happening rather than lending a helping hand. So, Dr. Razwana, I mean, could the bystander effect actually be adaptive in a modern context, helping, distribute responsibility and prevent panic? And if so, does it really deserve a negative label?
In some ways, yes, it can be adaptive in terms of even useful, right? If everybody rushes in without thinking, it can be chaos. It can make things worse, And I think the short pause that we take can actually allow someone to call the police, alert authorities, look at the situation from a different angle. And also, I suppose, people who are recording are actually collecting evidence too, and to some extent. So I think hesitation not always bad. And sometimes it can just, you just need the direction. So I think it's really about, we need to sometimes pause to think about the situation, but at the same time, we also need to not withdraw from the situation. I think the hesitation here is that think and plan what you can do, how you can help, whether you can help now or help later, or can you call for help, right? Rather than not be part of it at all. I think when you do that, I think that's when the society is no longer responsive to the needs of others, and that's not what we want.
Definitely. I think we've got some great perspective from both of you. Thank you so much both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been speaking to Dr. Annabelle Chow, who is the principal clinical psychologist at Annabelle Psychology, and Dr. Razwana Begum, who is the head of public safety and security program at the Singapore University of Social Sciences. Thank you so much for those who tuned in on our social media platforms and on air as well. Tune in again next week for another hot seat. I've been your host, Hongbin Jeong.
This is Money FM 89.3, Singapore's first